Good day, and welcome to Impact, a community affairs and discussion program of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. I'm Jeff Frederick. The citizen soldiers of the United States military live in a world defined by honor, duty, and country. Whether Army, Navy, Marines, National Guard, or Coast Guard, the 1.3 million active and 800,000 reservist women and men of the armed forces serve at home, abroad, in the front, and behind all of the lines to keep us free. The historical roots of the citizen soldier are an important part of the fabric of American history. The Continental Army was established and fought even before America officially declared its independence. Some 244 years later, the armed forces are still on duty in well over 100 countries across the globe. And while the nation's nuclear stockpile has been significantly reduced since the height of the Cold War, over 2,000 deployed warheads are at the ready. Thousands more are safely stocked away, and the best trained and best equipped troops in the world wear the stars and the stripes. 5 times the nation has formally gone to war: in 1812, during the Mexican-American and Spanish-American Wars, as well as during the First and Second World War. Countless other times, however, the call of duty has rung out in peacekeeping missions, police actions, recovery operations, or in non-declared wars. But enlisting, deploying, and completing missions are only the tip of the iceberg. Sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines eventually muster out of the service, and they head back into civilian society. Our topic for today is all things military. And joining me today is Mike Clawson, Director of Academic and Military Outreach at UNCP. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
So let's start at the very beginning. What got you excited? How and when did you know you were going to have a career in the military?
Well, I would like to tell you that I had decided it was the most honorable and dedicated project that I wanted to do. But actually, like a lot of students finishing college, not sure what I wanted to do. I was graduating, but I happened to walk by a recruiting station one day and walked in and asked, "Hey, I'm about to graduate. What can I do? And what can I do if I come into the military?"
And boy, did they have an answer for you.
Yeah, that set off a whole chain of events that eventually, ended 28 years later. But I did come to the conclusion after I joined, and I did get the spirit of the honor and the fulfillment of wanting to defend my country and serve my country. So, I maybe got to that feeling that I wish I could tell you that I started with, but it ended up that way.
And not only you, but all of the fellow men and women that you served with, they all had their own story and their own reason for jumping in.
Absolutely. That's, I think, is what's so good about the military is it does afford a lot of opportunity. You can come to the service with the goal of getting out and getting an education, because now Uncle Sam will pay for you. You may want job experience, you may want leadership. I mean, you can get that in the military, and it does afford a lot of opportunity. So everybody has their own story, own reason for signing up.
So you talked to a recruiter, you weren't exactly sure what was going to happen next, you decided to enlist, and then the next thing is boot camp.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that experience, and does it achieve what it's supposed to achieve? Well,
the short answer is yes, it does. Because you join the service as an individual, but you quickly learn that it's all about being part of a team. So I think that changes your mentality about how you approach problems and how you get things done, because just one person can't do that, especially when you're working at a team level, squad level, a platoon level, or in the military. But boot camp is a real it's an awakening. If you don't have any idea of what is about to happen, it's a shock.
What are a couple of specific memories that you might have?
It's designed to be that way, to get everybody in line. And my memories are arriving at boot camp. I actually went through basic training in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and that was back when Lincoln was still in administration and we were riding horses. But we got there in the middle of the night, which I think they plan to do on purpose. And you show up in the middle of the night, you're half asleep, you're not sure what's going on, you're not aware of your surroundings, and you're basically thrown off a bus, and there's there are 6 or 8 drill sergeants out there screaming in your face and telling you to do 5 things at once, and you can't even do the first one. So what you end up doing is quickly deciding what you need to prioritize. You just have to pick what you can do and do it the best you can, and try to slough off on the rest. But I do have some funny memories too. I remember when we first started, the following day after getting to boot camp, we had to check in with everything we showed up with had to be put in storage. GI meaning government issue. Everything you owned and had was now given to you by Uncle Sam, to include uniform down to your underwear. I mean, it was all given to you. But you had to remove everything that you had personally and put in a pack, and you would get that, once you finished. I remember one soldier at the time did not remove his own personal watch, and the drill sergeant noticed that the next day. And the recruit spent the next entire day in a trash can in our barracks, watching his watch, and at the peak of every hour, he had to pop out of the trash can and yell "cuckoo." So he did that for about 12 hours that day.
And soon lost the watch afterwards.
Yeah, and still gave up his watch. But those are the kind of stories basic training is filled with. I've forgotten most of the bad times. I mean, all I remember is the funny good times, and I think that's the way it is with most experiences, and the service is no different.
And the long and short of it is, though, the prioritization and the camaraderie and the overcoming of adversity and the teamwork, all of that comes together really from the first hour, right?
Absolutely. From the moment you arrive, that's drilled into you. And I'm retired Army, but it's like that across the board with all the services. It's about team. It's something bigger than yourself. It's selfless service, and it works. At least in my opinion.
And at the conclusion of that, you begin to work towards your area of specialization. Talk a little bit about how that is decided, and then the specific training that one undergoes for that.
Sure. It was a little bit different for me, as I was being a college graduate. After basic training, I went to officer candidate school to be commissioned as a second lieutenant. So my training, individual training, didn't really start till after the officer training, which I did at Fort Benning. But I had qualified for flight school, so there was another year of officer basic after basic training and officer candidate school. There was another about 9 months of officer basic, and then I went to flight school. So the first 2.5, 3 years of service for me was school and training. And for me, because I had my private pilot's license when I came into the military, I, in the Army, was branched an aviation officer. So I was off to Fort Rucker, Alabama, and started training. Now, for the junior folks in the military, the enlisted, they have some choice in what they want to do when they come into the service, but then they have to qualify for it. But all the services will tell you they'll meet the needs of the service first. So you may end up doing something you had no idea you wanted to do or could do, and be trained in doing that. Very few people come into the Army and want to go tote a rifle and be an infantryman, but most end up having to do that.
But still reinforcing the teamwork philosophy. You may prefer to do this, but we need you to do that.
Absolutely. Again, the needs of the service is first, and then even if you find yourself, no matter what you're doing, you're always part of a team. Whether you're a cook or an infantryman or an artilleryman, you are part of a team, and if you don't do your job, the team doesn't succeed in its mission. So not only do you know your job, you know your buddy's job. You always have to help each other out.
A smaller percentage of Americans have the military experience than if we were having this discussion in the 50s or 60s or 70s. So an awful lot of what American society knows about the military today, unfortunately, comes from television or the movies. Talk a little bit about the real world of daily life, though. Tell us a little bit about what really happens.
Sure. If you watch TV, there's somewhere between Stripes and Full Metal Jacket is the truth, is reality. The biggest thing I think about the military, and this wouldn't be a surprise to anybody, is the regiment of the day. It's pretty much laid out for you. It's not always, and of late, I spent the last 10 years I was in the service, we were either deployed or training to redeploy. So we were back and forth to Iraq and Afghanistan all the time. So things were a little bit different than the first part of my career, but most of it is, you're up in the morning early. Most of the time we have what we call formation, where every single person in the unit has to be there, whether they're living on the installation or not. And that usually starts at 5:30 or 6 in the morning. You know, and as you see, most young folks, at least around here, their hearts aren't even beating till about 8. So that sounds like that alone is an abrupt adjustment. But yeah, we'll show up and do physical training. And then there's time to, you know, get cleaned up and eat. The Army always feeds you well.
That's good.
At least in my opinion. I don't think most soldiers would tell you the food's all that good, but it is. It's good. And then you start your either your training or you're working in your specialty, as you mentioned before. I mean, you know, for an aviation unit that I was in, we were flying missions. We were flying support missions. The crew chiefs and mechanics were, you know, fixing aircraft. The cooks were preparing the next meal. I mean, everybody had a job, but it's regimented, and there's other things mixed within that day. Maybe you need to go to the range and qualify on your weapon. Maybe you need to go learn how to use your chemical gear. So there's many things that are planned, and it's planned months in advance. So there's really not much by surprise.
So a combination of daily activities, including some physical training, some regular specialization items, some ongoing training or retraining and certification, and, you know, before you know it, the day is over and
Absolutely.
It's time to get some sleep.
Absolutely. The only thing that might be a little different is, you know, being in the service is a 24/7 job. You may go home at the end of what you thought your duty day was, and you're called back to do something else, or get ready to deploy somewhere.
You're
So
always
that's the
on
big
call. Yes.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Well, I won't ask you to talk about all the different countries you've been to, but maybe talk a little bit about the attitudes that you found in other countries about Americans and about American servicemen.
Yeah, thank you for asking about that. For the most part, my experiences all have been very good. Now, you know, that may be different when we were deployed to combat zones where, you know, clearly people didn't want us to be there. But I traveled a lot in Europe, the Middle East. I've had 2 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. And I tell you, the people I ran into appreciated the Americans. It was a great experience. They were glad we were there, and most of them knew why we were there, you know, as opposed to what you might hear in the media sometimes. But even the media was always, you know, very supportive. I mean, we usually have embedded media with us when we would deploy, but we were always pretty much welcomed, as my experience would dictate. And I also had I thought the most interesting or the most fun deploying and meeting other people were the children. The kids were always coming up. They were, I think, more out of curiosity than anything, because, you know, the American soldiers are the best equipped in the world. So when you showed up, you had your full uniform, you had all your equipment on, you had
What
a
does
helmet,
that do?
goggles.
What does this do?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you might have night vision goggles mounted on your helmet. You have a weapon with scopes, and at least in our unit, we did our best to carry, you know, extra candy or gum or something. Right. It was always good to help build relations and we'd give it to the kids. But then we got reprimanded for that because they didn't have toothbrushes and toothpaste to brush teeth, so we were accused of causing cavities. So we had to come up with other things like crayons and coloring books and stuff like that. So it was always a trade-off, but we were always welcome. People were always trying to feed us, and, you know, you always had to find a polite way to decline most of the time because you weren't sure what they were trying to feed you. And, but we were always welcomed. People seemed to go out of their way.
So for those that don't know, when you enlist or you join up, is there a specific time period that you're committed to? At one point in time, do soldiers and sailors start thinking about extending that? At what point in time do you start thinking about, well, I want to start prepping for the rest of my life?
Sure. It differs based on the specialty that you're in and the training you've received. It also differs with the rank at which you've achieved at that point. But usually initial sign up is 4 to 5 years, sometimes 6, again depending upon what specialty you've signed up for. If the service has paid a lot of money for your training, they want to keep you around a little bit longer. And plus, if it's a very specialized occupation that you're in, you're very marketable when you get out. So there's an incentive to want to keep a service member, he or she, after they've been trained. For officers, it's a little different. For me, my initial commitment was 6 years, but then again, they spent money on me going to flight school, and a lot of pilots get out and fly for the airlines and that sort of thing, and so the commitments are varying, and then once you decide whether you want to get out after that initial commitment or not, It's usually around 5, 6, 7 year mark. And then if you sign up, there's usually a bonus if you decide you want to come back, which is an incentive, another incentive for you to stick around. And if you stay after that second commitment, you've done, more than 10 years, and then you start thinking,
retirement?
well, maybe I should stay in for 20 and shoot for that retirement. And I was a slow learner. It took me 28 years to figure that out, but there's always another rank to achieve or another goal to meet or another incentive. And it goes by fast. My time just seemed to blow by, and it was time to figure out how to get out. And you had mentioned, what do you do when you start trying to figure that out? And all the services have their own transition program. In fact, the Army calls it Transitional Assistance Program. So about a year away from your time, you will get orders that will reassign you to a detachment that helps you start prepping to get out. Everything from how to dress, how to write a resume, how to slowly transition back into the real world from the dark side.
They help you prepare for a total change of daily expectations.
Right, and I'll say they help you prepare, but a lot of it's left up to the individual. I mean, you can slide through this, what is offered to you, or you can take it seriously and do. I think that's why some folks do better when they transition, when they get out. Some really take that to heart, that transitional program, and others are just thinking, just get me out of here, and they're doing their time, and they get out, and then they realize, man, maybe I should have paid a little more attention to what.
Yeah, so if you're going home to work in the family business, you may take advantage of less of those transition services.
Right.
If you're really not sure how to take your military skill and transition it into a civilian economy, you really need to be spending a lot of time in those kinds of things.
Absolutely, right. In fact, being here at school, I run into the problem, being the director for academic and military outreach. A lot of times I'll have veterans walk in the door and say, hey, I think I'm entitled to some kind of educational benefit. What might that be? And I'm shocked, given the fact that all that information is available, and you don't walk out the door without it. And the sad part is most of them are eligible and could have been receiving benefits had they started it sooner. So when I hear about somebody getting out of the service, I just really hammer home, man, pay attention to the transitional services offered.
So let's talk a little bit about that, whether you do take advantage of all those services or not. It is an abrupt departure. What are the sorts of immediate challenges that seem to really burden former military folks as they move into that changing society?
I think some of the biggest things are, face it, in the civilian world, if you, I'll just take a job, for example. You show up for your job, and you're a few minutes late. Most people, that doesn't really matter. Shoot, you might not even show up at all that day, and it would still be okay. So not in the military, not only can you not, be late. I mean, you can't decide you're not, you can't decide I'm not going to work today. There's much bigger consequences for that. So I think part of the biggest transitional issue that a lot of veterans has is just what they would describe as discipline. And I'm not saying the civilians are not disciplined, it's just a different approach to things, and so it's hard to make those kind of transitions. Being on time, being very respectful. I mean, I can take veterans here at the university, for example, sometimes perceive other students being disrespectful in the fact that they're not responding with yes sir or no sir. We know that's not a requirement to be respectful, but there's things like that. So that mindset coming out of the military is a lot more about discipline and following the rules. They're just not used to people, getting out of the white lines.
Because the military will teach you immediately about cause and effect.
That's
right.
Right. There's always a cause and effect.
And there's also an inherent structure involved in all of your activities, daily, weekly, in terms of mission mindset,
right.
And that becomes more open-ended.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and it's all related, and it's all about perception and trying to understand that when you get out. And some of the things are complicated, a little more complicated with service members, especially if they've had multiple combat tours or that sort of thing. Because then we're talking about some other issues that folks in the civilian world don't have to. They're empathetic and they respect it, but they don't understand it.
Right.
So that's another challenge.
And they might occasionally ask questions that really ought not to be asked, maybe
to
try to understand, but those questions aren't necessarily always well received.
Right. Some of the greatest questions are like, hey, have you ever killed somebody? Or it really can set somebody back with questions like that. And
Do not ask that question, right?
Exactly.
So, but some questions we might want to know more about for those people who don't take advantage of Veterans Administration health benefits. How does that work? Are there local facilities? What is covered? What is not? For those people who don't really take advantage of it, how does that system work?
Yeah. In North Carolina, in fact, North Carolina is the 5th largest veteran population in the United States, and there's a lot of support in this state, for example. And each county has their own veterans county office that helps facilitate all these kind of benefits we're talking about: health benefits, educational benefits, financial aid, those kinds of things that will help. So there's always local offices nearby. A lot of schools, just like here at UNCP, we have people off the street come in and ask if we can help, and we'll certainly get them to the right agency. Of course, the VA at the state and federal level are there. They're not always known as being the most efficient or effective, as we always hear in the news, but it's not from not trying. So there are a lot of agencies out there. In fact, I think we suffer a lot of times from information overload. There are so many agencies and folks out there trying to help veterans that also is a problem. They don't know where to start.
It's too big of a buffet of decisions
it really
to make.
is. It really is. So there are a lot of agencies out there to help, but I would always recommend starting with the VA at the local level.
And talk about the educational benefits. Mm-hmm. So I've retired from the military. I did not go to college before or during. Now suddenly I want to. What are the kinds of questions, what are the kinds of benefits that a typical retired soldier, sailor, Marine, airman could take advantage of?
The latest and greatest GI Bill benefit was instituted in August of 2009, and that is the post 9/11 GI Bill. And what makes that so important is two things. One is it had never provided enough money to get a 4-year degree for a service member if they chose to go back to school. Well, the post 9/11 GI Bill does that. It pays for tuition and gives you a housing allowance while you're going to school. And the second part of that, which I think is something that had never happened with previous GI Bills, is that you can, if the service member decides not to use his educational benefits, he can give his eligibility to a spouse or his children, his or her children, and can do it in a combination of, if they had 2 children, they could give
half here and half there.
Correct, or divide it up however they want. So those two things far exceed anything that had been going on in GI Bill, educational GI Bill benefits prior to 2009. So, and for example, here at this university, there are over 500 military dependents coming to school here on the post 9/11 GI Bill, and that's a biggest part of our workload, is making sure those family members are taken care of.
And that's wonderful. That service is well appreciated and hard fought and earned, and we ought to be taking care of and providing those sorts of transformative benefits to the men and women who help us. That's right. Yeah. So let me promote you here a little bit to Chief Architect of all things military. Talk about one thing that you wish was a little different for those people who are in, and talk about one thing that you wish was a little bit better for those who have retired from the military.
I think, for me, looking back, I think things could always be better. Care could always be improved for family members. I really feel strongly that any service member that serves their family is serving right along with them. That they're having to go through the same type hardships. And in fact, I think my family went through harder times than I did. When I'm not there, they had to take care of everything at the house. So along with that are programs to take care of spouses and families, and also what I think in regards mainly to that would be like housing could be improved, especially at least on the lately in the news, you hear a lot of issues about military housing, the Marine and Army posts that are so old. The housing is slowly being renovated and rebuilt, but it's just a long, slow process. And it's just not up to par as to where it should be, I believe. And I think that could be improved. And the services are working on that. It's just a long, slow process. Right. For those that are still in and getting out, I go back to the transitional programs. I think maybe it should be more of a mandatory, no kidding, have somebody go through classes that you know, everything else is lockstep in the military. I think that process should be as well, and that would educate those service members getting out on exactly what they're entitled to. Right now, it's if you don't know, you're your only manager.
So there could be this long lag time between the day that I leave and the day that I figure out what I really want to do next, and we could structure and organize that so that that lag time would be shortened.
I believe so, yeah. I think there could be a better way to do that. I wish I was smart enough to figure that out. I maybe could make some money doing that.
We'd really promote you, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
A question I've got to ask, right? So the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force, the Coast Guard. There's some legendary stories about how you guys don't all necessarily get along. Do you care to comment on the relationship between the rival branches?
I think, first off, I think it's great to have rivalries. It keeps everybody fresh and competitive. But it's a big brotherhood. Everybody's in it together. And you have to have those 5 services because they have 5 distinct missions and we do things differently. But clearly the Army is the best. It's the way to go. So, yeah.
Well, you heard it here first, right? So we're heading to the end of our time here today, but let me just sort of throw out some lightning round questions. What's the one thing you would want people who have never served or don't have family members to know about what goes on in the military?
I think if I could emphasize one thing, I think everybody believes the service, and especially the Army, because I hear this all the time. Well, you know, if I don't finish school, I can always join the Army. I can always join the military. Well, frankly, that's just not true. It's very competitive. It's the most educated, highly equipped military we've ever had, and there's very strategic, intelligent people running those services. And we don't just go around hammering finishing nails into the wall with a sledgehammer. I mean, people give a lot of thought about what goes on. And you know, the services are the last people that want to see any kind of conflict anywhere. And I just don't think people really understand that or think about that. The services are a great place to get an education and get job training and leadership, and it's more than just a fallback. It's way more than just a fallback.
Quick question. If there was some sort of one-day mandatory national service which could include the military, would you be in favor of that?
I would be for some sort of national service. I don't believe I'd be in for mandatory service in the services. There are a lot of people just not cut out for the military, and it's best that they're probably, you know, not in the military. So I don't, you know, I'm all for, you know, serving your country in one capacity or another, but maybe not necessarily in the armed forces.
The teamwork, the adversity, the determination, it's not for everybody.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Yeah. Well, this has been great. I want to thank Mike Clawson from Military and Academic Outreach for being here today to give us a little firsthand insight into life in the military. Any predictions, Mike, before we leave on the Army-Navy game in 2019?
Well, you know, Army's been a lot stronger the last few years, so I think maybe they'll keep up the streak. I think they've won a couple in a row, and they'll be number 3 coming up.
Good to know. Thank you for joining us. Tune in next time on Impact.